Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Rockpile Report podcast. I'm your host, Bill, season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. And that was Brett Coleman and EJ Snyder from Bootleg Football talking about Bijan Robinson and how at 27 for the Buffalo Bills, if he was available, he would be best player available. Now, I find that funny, Chris, because if he was there at 27, like, does anyone actually believe that's going to happen?
I don't think that's
reasonable.
I don't think that's reasonable at all.
I think that
I wouldn't be surprised if it was like a Zeke situation.
Well, this is where trying to prognosticate running backs gets funny, because we as fans and not GMs, we fall in love with players. There are certain players that we like, and then we, find other players, and we say, oh no, these guys, they can't be, that guy, no, he can't be worth more than player X or player Y. And then you watch him get drafted in the top 10. Jameson Williams with a torn ACL at wide receiver last year got drafted in the top 12 with a torn ACL in the national title game. Like, what? You just drafted a wide receiver who you knew wasn't going to see the field for his entire rookie season. You drafted him inside the top 15. That's wild to me. And yet here we are. Like, we live in that world. And that's very much the way that it feels like his Bijan Robinson pick could go. You could be, all it takes is one GM to say that I need this, or I'm this away from being the best team in the NFL, or at least, hey, I have a young quarterback and I need this. I don't know. There's a lot there that could impact this. And also there's the question, do we need that? I don't know. That's why we get together and we do this every year, Chris. We sit down with people much smarter than us to talk about positionally the things that are coming up in that year's NFL draft. And so in keeping with the theme of the month, welcome to our 2023 NFL Draft for Dummies installment on running backs.
Matt Waldman.
You're about to get to know me even better. I brought you here because I want to show you something that almost no one knows about.
The Barry White of podcasting and the creator of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio.
It might be cold outside, but it's about to get warm all up in my jazz.
Matt Waldman, everybody, a Duke Silver in his own right, creator of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, and the guy responsible for Chris and I making, not only in the same year, making our fantasy championships, but also me using his work to make the fantasy playoffs a league record 7 consecutive years. Matt, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for, I'm glad to hear that things are going well for you. That's awesome.
So I have to ask, are you still noodling? You still a jazz man?
I still play. Yeah, I play. I'm learning 2 instruments right now, and having a good time with it. Just finished practicing a little bit about an hour ago, so that's cool.
How do you find time for that with your busy NFL draft schedule?
Well, for me, it's. I just, you make time. It's like going to school while you're at work or something like that. My wife's at school while my wife works, or is going to school while she's working a corporate gig. And, so, for me, I just, I try and find a couple hours a day. Usually it's late at night, and that works out okay just because my wife sleeps like a rock. And, I live in a neighborhood that apparently with 5 boys on one side and 5 girls on the other, they don't hear anything when they go to sleep at night. They have no idea that I even play an instrument, and I play fairly loud. So it's amazing to me that I'm getting away with this. I feel like I'm stealing.
I love it. So we're here tonight to talk about running backs, which is a position of yours. It's kind of a specialty of yours. It's something that you not only have a love for, but you've proven over time through your work over at the RSP to have a real knack for kind of nailing down in terms of just identifying NFL type traits, skill sets. And I like that that's the direction of your work, that you focus on those things rather than trying to be a out and out prognosticator saying this is where this guy is going to be drafted or this is a fit. Instead, you look at if you were this type of offense, this player could be a fit. Or this is the style of approach that this team utilizes, which is why players X, Y, and Z could make sense. And out of those three, here's what I like about each. You take a really scientific approach to all this stuff, and I've always had a really big appreciation for that.
Thanks.
So in terms of laying out the makeup of this year's draft class, I kind of want to look back, because last year we dealt with a class that had three guys who were pretty much throughout the draft process unanimously at the top of everybody's prognostication board. There was Breece Hall, Kenny Walker, Isaiah Spiller. Those were the three guys whose names were out of everybody's mouth first. And then the draft happened. And the Buffalo Bills' James Cook was actually the third back off the board at the end of the second round, while Spiller fell all the way to the fourth. Even with, and I guess I look at how that went for him. The Chargers had plenty of opportunities to go around for running backs. I know that their depth chart got a significant amount of work over the course of the season. Still couldn't find much in the way of carries for Isaiah Spiller. First of all, what do you think went wrong with Spiller in terms of his rookie acclimation to the NFL?
Well, he got hurt. That was part of it. So, he had some time away. Second of all, I really don't look at it as went wrong, because I know that it's easy for people to ask that question after 1 year and guys don't immediately contribute. We're in a fantasy-oriented society, so that kind of thing happens with football. But, we got to remember that it can take a year of adjustment for pass protection, for understanding defenses as a receiver and the routes that you need to be able to run. And then on top of that, there are things that were different with Spiller that weren't all that great. I mean, Spiller to me was a tier below, well, close to a tier below where Hall and Walker were. Walker and Hall had significantly higher grades for me. So Spiller's more of a guy that, fit best in one type of scheme. And there were things where he had some decision-making issues. He had some issues with his pad level and getting everything to, getting his hips and pads aligned to maximize his power. And we talked about that last year.
Yep.
So, really right now it's just a matter of that Austin Eckler is a Pro Bowl player. Joshua Kelly wasn't mincemeat. There were people that kind of got off that train quickly when he seemed like a sleeper prospect, but he kind of worked his way back into the graces of the team and played well. And so when you have a guy who's developed after 3 years in the league, and he's been in the league for 3 years, versus a guy who may have a little bit of work to do entering the league, that kind of thing can happen. So I think it's more of the facet of Eckler's good, Eckler's great, Kelly got better, and Spiller's a rookie, and we just leave it at that, and we'll see how that develops on the line, because obviously Eckler's not going to get paid the way he wants to. He's complaining about that. So that means they probably recognize what they have on their depth chart, or at least they're hopeful about it, and feel like we're not going to, get ourselves over our skis too much financially when it comes to the running back position with what they have.
Well, and that's something Bills fans are used to. Like with this GM, he has during his tenure here hasn't gone. I mean, I don't even think hog wild. He hasn't really invested much in anything of significance in the running back position. It's funny to hear you describe the class in terms of having like two players who were at the very top for you in terms of grade, and then there was just a lot of other guys who were a clear step below. When we look at this year's class, it seems like a lot of people seem to see it kind of the same way this season, where there's two guys kind of ahead of everyone else in the pecking order, and then it's a dice roll as to where everyone could slot in behind that. Do you think it's a fair comparison?
Actually, I don't.
Okay.
This year, I think there's 6 players who could start right away. And I think while I like Bijan Robinson, and I certainly have him a healthy tier or a healthy amount above the next 2 guys, or really the next 4 guys, those next 4 guys would have graded out last year at a pretty nice, would have graded out above Isaiah Spiller. That's for sure. They would have. So I look at this class and I think that they're, and I don't even really, the grade is a nice way of summing things up, but I really think that there are 6 players that if you ask them to do what they do well, right away, that they could be, fantasy starters. I think they could be top 15 backs in the right offenses. While Robinson is seen as the blue chip prospect and far and away the best guy, and I think he is the best guy, I think that there are really 4 players who could wind up with production similar or better than Robinson based on where each ends up going. If Bijan Robinson gets the Saquon Barkley treatment and goes to a crappy offensive line with a team that's fairly inept at quarterback early on, I don't care how good he is. He's going to probably average 3.7 to 3.9 yards per carry. People are going to say he's not all that great or that he's inconsistent or all these things because, again, we in fantasy ignore the offensive line. Once they start building out the offensive line, just like LaDainian Tomlinson, who averaged 3.9 yards per carry when he first came to the Chargers, you'll start to see that gel where he gets the help because running backs need, they need holes. They need blockers who can be reliable to where they're supposed to go. And that's just you're not going to find many backs who can transcend that. And the backs who could are honestly, they're all retired or dead at this point, and there weren't many of them.
No, I think that's why we feel so fondly about so many of those players, right? Adrian Peterson, Emmitt Smith, Thurman Thomas. You go back to some of these guys who were Hall of Fame running backs. A friend and I were having a conversation just about the way the NFL has moved. How many Hall of Fame running backs have been drafted in the last decade? The guy that you would point at and say, that guy is a first ballot, or maybe even just like, hey, he's a second ballot Hall of Famer. I feel like the name of the game and also opportunities, and they're just harder for those types of guys to find.
Yeah, I would just say that, to me, when I think of guys who could have transcended an offensive line, I think of Walter Payton and Jim Brown, and that's about it.
Okay. Well, and it's interesting you say that because one of the things that's been bouncing around in my head this whole
Barry
offseason.
Sanders.
Okay, Barry Sanders was like the Lions were perennially bad, and that guy just continued to make everyone around him look phenomenal, unless you were on defense. Isaiah Pacheco got a lot of run last year. 7th round pick, and he hard-nosed running style, and how did all these GMs miss on him? To what you're saying right here, I don't think it's that they missed on him. I think Kansas City built a very good offensive line. And that light boxes against a north-south runner with a hard running style and a very good line. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out he could find success.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I had Pacheco ranked 9th. I had him ranked as a rotational starter. So, he was a guy that I felt strong about, saw as a sleeper in this class. But you have to understand that really it's, do they see him as a long-term starter? I don't know yet. They see him a part of the offense, I think, for sure. It's just a matter of every NFL team ran the ball well last year because every NFL, really the bigger story here isn't about Pacheco and the offensive line. The bigger story here is that for the first time in 10 years, EPA, what everyone likes to talk about, was down in the passing game to levels that we hadn't seen until a decade ago. And that's because what I've been talking, a lot of people like myself and others who watch the game have talked about for years, which is eventually when teams adopt the spread and spread out defenses enough, defenses have to respond by playing cover 2, which will limit how much the deep passing game works. They're going to be spreading out and using linebackers who are really safeties in disguise, the Deion Buchanans of the world, the Isaiah Simmons, all these guys who are uber athletes, but really they aren't linebackers, not on the level of what it takes to run, to defend the run. So the offenses were going to look up one day and go, okay, so they're stopping the deep passing game. So we're going to run power. We're going to run toss. We're going to run counter. We're going to match up tight ends and large slot receivers against these shrimps that they're calling linebackers. and we're going to pound it down your throat because now we have the actual athletic advantage to run these types of plays that we didn't have the athletic advantage before when you actually had a big tackling linebacker, third linebacker in the box or a good box safety. So teams now they're all running at will. So when you can do that, well, Pacheco was a good player because he had good speed. He was someone that ran hard. He was good with gap running. They ran a lot of counter. They ran some toss. They certainly ran power. And that worked out very well with their offensive line. So he was a good match. But so was Tyler Algier, player that I didn't think was all that special. And really, I mentioned that he was although he was a zone runner, he was a better fit in a gap game. And wide zone is a good bridge between zone and gap. Because wide zone, especially the way Kyle Shanahan runs it, because Kyle Shanahan in a West Coast offense, he and his dad have kind of the same attitude about their players in West Coast, which is, you're a cog in my machine, my offense, yep. Not you. You're not the star. I'm the star in this offense. And I'm kind of being a little facetious about that, but quarterbacks often complain that West Coast offensive coaches can feel like they're playing a video game and the players are just like pieces in that. They're just pixels on a screen or the controller that they're manipulating. And, when it comes to the run game, they do the same thing. Elijah Mitchell is a good example too. It's just like they're not going diagnose things, be patient, see if you can set up this crease and find the cutback. No, man, they don't want the cutback. What they want is, we've got a great line. We've got good tight ends. We've got good blocking receivers. We're going to open this hole. Just hit this thing hard. Don't think. We don't want you to think.
I'll design it. You just go out there and execute it.
You just execute it. And that's exactly what's happened. Algier is the same thing, to me. And it's like, Cordero Patterson, Cordero Patterson is known as kind of the Nuke LaLoosh of, if you remember, Bull Durham,
yes.
He's the Nuke LaLoosh of like NFL players. Unbelievable physical talent. Gifted in many ways. One of the best open field runners I've ever graded at any position. But he was not one of those guys. He could be a smart guy. I'm sure he's a smart guy. But there's a different type of intelligence to translate what's in the whiteboard, in the coach's office, and in the RB room or wide receiver room, and then doing it on the field. And he just could not pick up the coverages and do the things he needed to do. And they moved him at running back and made it simple like this.
Yep.
And look what he did.
Yeah. Well, then, so with that in mind, does this class, in your opinion, have more talent that you feel would be a better fit in a gap scheme or a zone scheme?
I'd have to count it up, to be honest with you, but there's a lot of gap guys that are available in this. I would say there's a pretty good even mix, and it's easier to run gap than it is to run zone. So
tell it to the Buffalo
Bills. You can kind of do that. Yeah. And at the top of the board, I can tell you this. There's most of the guys that I have listed, with the exception of most of the 12 guys I've listed, who I think could develop into serious contributors, if not starters, all of them can run gap really well, with the exception of maybe, let's say, one. One needs a little bit more work at it, and that's Israel Abinaconda. And he still can get there, but he's just a better zone runner, if you ask me. So same with Kendre Miller, I guess, but I would say that's not too much of a difference either. So 2 out of 12.
Okay.
And 12 is a deep class. You're talking about 12 guys. Be that way.
So in terms of turning this into a Bills-centric conversation, every talking head, we open the show with the audio, but every talking head out there thinks that the Bills need, not just like, hey, they kind of need that. Need in capital letters. Need to find a way to draft Bijan Robinson or a Bijan Robinson-esque talent. I mean, Jim Kelly, the most successful Bills quarterback of all time, went on record this summer earlier this spring talking about, I couldn't do it alone. Josh Allen can't do it alone. I guess when you talk about Bijan Robinson, his name is on the lips of a lot of Bills fans. First of all, where do you see him going, just in terms of the first round? And do you think it's something that from 27, it's even reasonable to talk about the Bills trying to get there?
I don't think it's reasonable to try and get there, because you're basically saying we're going to sacrifice the future of our organization to get this guy.
Yep.
And that means that we're going to need the offense to carry us, and we're going to be the San Diego Chargers from the 1980s translated to the 2020s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that, you know, where you're all offense and no defense, because eventually you're going to lose your defense, giving up the number of picks you're going to have to get to trade all the way up there. I would have to think, or unless you can, you know, and I think Gabriel Davis is a fine enough player, but I have criticisms of him being anything more than a complimentary receiver who benefits from primary options that are better. But, you know, if some team gets fooled thinking Gabriel Davis was more, I think they saw that last year that it's not. But if they could have gotten fooled that he was a wide receiver one of the future, you could have unloaded him and somehow got it. That would have been great. But they don't have that kind of talent to give up and then still compete for the bowl. And I don't think you need it. I mean, I like Bijan Robinson. I think that with a top back, a top back is a difference maker still. Mm-hmm. I know people are all about running backs don't matter, and they get down on Ezekiel Elliott and what happened there. Let me tell you, Ezekiel Elliott, if you had the team in your prime, if you had a defense, if you had wide receivers, if you had some of the things that the Cowboys needed to have, he was a big part of why they were even like good enough for people to be mad that they lost.
Well, exactly. Okay? And so that's where I think a lot of Bills fans have landed. They're going, we have the team, and yet every year we go against these other teams that have more firepower than us, and we can't keep pace. You know, you have the firefight with Kansas City 2 years ago. You have that game where the Cincinnati defense just absolutely showed up and punched you in the face, and there was you didn't have any punch back. There was no counter punch to your offense. Yeah. So I can see where fans who are clamoring for a highly drafted running back out of this class are coming from. I guess I look at this philosophically. Our running back one last season was Devin Singletary. Finished 30th in the NFL in carries, which kind of shows you what a low-volume rushing attack the Bills are compared to other teams. Now, some people might make the case, well, if they had a better talent, they would utilize it. But I don't know that to be true, because it's kind of been this way ever since Josh Allen took his step forward in 2020. Yep. This is what the Bills' offense... I mean, Green Bay and Dallas had two running backs finish with more carries on the season than the Bills' de facto running back one. It's just not a focal point of our offense, but why would it be? Your best player is your quarterback. And so with that in mind, I'm thinking about what comes after that tier of... First of all, are you of the mindset that Jahmyr Gibbs is running back two and that he is in that same sort of tier as Robinson?
He's, for the Bills, let's just skip Jahmyr Gibbs. You don't need to talk about him, because you have James Cook.
Well, that was going to be, there we go. See, that's it.
You don't need to talk about him. If you're going to take him, you're basically taking a Charlie Garner type of back, for a team that already has that kind of back, maybe not quite as powerful, but certainly can catch the ball, certainly can do the versatile things. What you need is a guy who can run between the tackles more often, and can give you, if you want them to be similar in that they both can catch the ball and they can pass protect, but you want one to be shaded a little more towards, you know, running the ball between the tackles and having a higher workload. There's 4 or 5 guys that you can get in this class, other than Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, who you'll be happy with. If you never knew Bijan Robinson existed, there are 4 or 5 guys in this class that you would be clamoring for. So, and some of them will still be around, probably in the 4th round.
See, so and that's it. That's the thing I want people to hear is, guys, there doesn't need to be a land rush to get even if running back, which is now questionable, because whether our GM even wants one. I mean, just the other day, Latavius Murray was here on a free agent visit. Yeah. So you're talking about a team that you drafted James Cook last year. You traded for Nyheim Hines and reworked his contract to keep him around. You signed Damian Harris, and now you're flirting with the idea of adding what's probably a practice squad, break glass in case of emergency veteran running back. those don't strike me as the actions of a GM who's going to trip all over himself trying to pick a running back highly in this class. And realistically, you hit on it. I've been thinking this whole offseason. There don't strike me as a ton of guys who would be a vast improvement over James Cook in a second year. Like, I guess so coming in as a rookie, trying to draft one very high versus this idea or concept of, we have James Cook, you have Damian Harris, who Damian Harris isn't a world beater. He's not going to set the world on fire. He's not going to make fans forget that Thurman Thomas was ever here.
Well, make them forget Devin Singletary was there.
Well, and that's it. So if you can take that Devin Singletary role for under $2 million for the season, you've got James Cook, who, as a receiving back, he showed that he has chops. He showed that he has a little wiggle on some counters and some inside stuff when the play is blocked correctly and when the opportunity presents itself. And then he's got enough speed, legitimate play speed, that he can get out, and when he recognizes his blocks, he can pick up meaningful yardage as a true running back and not just a receiving back. I feel like it would be a poor usage of our assets, given all of our other needs and the need to set ourselves up for the future with an ever-increasing quarterback cap hit, that early, day one, day two running back, probably not advisable. Does that make me crazy for feeling that way?
No, I think it makes people crazy to think that you need a running back at all. If you want to pick one after the 4th round, I think that's totally fine, because you might be able to get a diamond in the rough who's going to be able to develop, because there's always guys who fall who are very talented. And with 12 backs in this class, again, there are guys that you're going to be able to get who can offer that complementary role and work behind Damian Harris. Damian Harris to me is the guy that would be the face of the Mason-Dixon line between a starter and a high-end contributor. Kind of like Jeff Wilson in Miami. Very competent in all phases of the game. And you really don't need anything more than that right now. Mm-hmm. Devin Singletary wasn't competent in all phases of the game. I'm sorry. He was a fine back, but he's a talented player. You're a talented player if you're in the NFL and getting the start. But he's slow. I've said this before. He's short. He's small. He's slow. He's not very quick. He just had unbelievable vision. He's the guy you should admire in the same way that I joke that Terry McLaurin is the bumblebee of wide receivers, because it's literally physically or from a physics standpoint, it's impossible that he should catch the ball the technique that he uses. Well, Devin Singletary as a running back, it should be impossible for him to be a starting running back only on basically vision and the lack of athletic characteristics that he has, but he can compensate well enough with that. He's a good backup for the NFL. So Damian Harris is a significant upgrade. He's not great, no, but he's a significant upgrade. He breaks tackles. He has burst. He can make the first man miss. He changed his running style when he came from Alabama to New England. Somebody in New England, Dom Fears or whoever it was, probably said, look, we're running gap. We're not running zone. You need to hit these things decisively. And he looks like a different back from what I saw at Alabama. Go back and watch Alabama tape, and you see a guy who can make cuts. You can see a guy who had light feet, You watch him in New England, he looks like a grinder.
Well, and that was always, I'm an Alabama fan, so I watched his entire career there, and that was always the thing I thought. When he hits the NFL, I don't know. You're right. North-South, he gets there. And that's why he's such a nice complement to the room they already have with Hines and with Cook. So before we let you go, obviously there's players that Chris and I both have on the top of our minds. Just want to pick your brain about it a little bit.
Sure.
You already mentioned the name of the first one that's right here. Israel Abanikanda. He's a guy that a lot of Bills fans have been talking about him lately because the Bills scouts it's confirmed, it's not rumored, they've been at a couple Pitt games this year. They've also spent time scouting other Pitt players, so obviously they're there watching his games, or maybe they are there to see him. Also, they talked to him at the Combine, and there was talk about him, potentially being a pre-draft invite. A 9.62 RAS score for a player like him was surprising to me. And I just look at this and say 4.4 speed, but agility drills that don't match that tape. Is he more of a north-south runner, or do you think he has the ability to be a potential down the road 3-down back?
I'll put it to you this way. The guy that I have, you're going to like this because it flows into our subject matter pretty quickly. The high-end aspirational player is Josh Jacobs. If he can get better as a receiver, I don't think, from when I think about him as a receiver, he uses the technique that he needs to. He can catch the ball and take a hit. There's nothing really bad there. It's about the route running that needs to get a little bit better, identifying coverages, things that young players need to do. But as a running back, he doesn't have great reacceleration after he stops his feet to avoid contact. I think if he can develop that in some level, or he can be a little bit more ferocious with his attack, he'll be a compelling lead back at some point. But, the explosion we know is there. He can break tackles. But I would say he's a player that is a better zone runner than gap runner right now. It's week or two that can change that. Mm-hmm. But the player that he reminds me of, or that he's like a starter kit for right now, is Damian Harris. So if you have Damian Harris, my comp says Josh Jacobs, highest end if everything works out terrifically and he exceeds expectation. Damian Harris is the guy that if he can improve a couple of things, he's going to be like Damian Harris. And where he is right now is just below that. So, if you want redundancy, you're going to get that with Abinaconda. He's just going to be a better athlete, but it's got to show up in terms of, how he processes the game.
And then real quick, there's two players everyone's polarized on. Honest assessment as quickly as you can. Why is Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA such a polarizing prospect? And how much of a long shot is Deuce Vaughn? Because I watched a lot of K-State football for some reason this year, and it just seemed like he was making electric plays, and yet it just doesn't seem with his size and just the way he tested athletically, he has much for the NFL.
Well, Charbonnet, I'm not sure why he's polarizing. To me, he's an explosive, rugged back. He can catch, he can block. He's a pretty darn good blocker at this stage of his career. Maybe it's because, so many people are playing fantasy football, and they adopt the fantasy football analyst mindset of faster the better, slower the worst, rather than thinking that there's a threshold for what is fast enough to be a starter in the league. 4.53, 40 speed, is fast enough to be in the league. 37-inch vertical, explosive enough. Maybe it's because he didn't have huge production at Michigan. Maybe that was it. He was behind some folks, and I don't know what it is. To me, he's a competent guy who will be at least a high-end reserve who will get a lot of playing time, like Alexander Madison did, behind Dalvin Cook, who you could come in and knew that he was going to do a good job. Or, if everything he's never going to be Arian Foster, but there's a lot of skills that have influence, a lot of style to his game that has influence with Arian Foster, who was a slower back, a 4.7, 6.40 back with incredible quickness and great feet and ran with power. And Charbonnet has a lot of those skills. It's just maybe not to the degree that Foster did. Still, I don't get it. As far as Vaughn, I'm a fan of Vaughn. If Vaughn were bigger, he would be a top 5 back in this class. He's one of the best running backs in terms of skills that's in this class. He's an excellent receiver too. Problem is that when you start looking at things that have weighted value and how I evaluate, and I think that I would honestly say that teams should evaluate, is that power and contact balance and blocking all require you to win against defenders in the box. Yeah. And part of the way I grade is, can you win against contact against box defenders? And if the answer is overwhelmingly no, or only in an exceptional circumstance, you're not going to reach. You just don't have the height to ride the ride or the size to ride the ride. And he can be a specialty player and he can be helpful in certain regards, but how many quarterbacks really feel good about trying to find a 5'5" guy who runs great routes and is a good receiver, but they're not going to feel like he's a big enough target that they're going to be competent enough to hit him as good as they are or see him.
That's an amazing point. I didn't even think of that. Chris, who's the fired Jaguars head coach?
Gus Bradley?
No, the one from Ohio State.
Urban Meyer.
Oh.
That's all Deuce Vaughn needs is an Urban Meyer to go, you know what, I'm going to draft this wide receiver. I'm going to draft this running back, and he's immediately a wide receiver. That's what
that would be true, but I don't think Deuce Vaughn made Tom Lemming's list. So he drafted straight from Tom Lemming's list of as if he was recruiting high school players into college as opposed to looking at them from college.
And look where he is now. Now, as far as your scouting philosophy and your procedure, everyone can learn more about it over at the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find it and what you have new for 2023?
Well, sure. You can find the Rookie Scouting Portfolio at mattwaldman.com if you want to buy it directly. You get a pre-draft and a post-draft publication. Pre-draft publication is a bookmark PDF that you can look for everything you want to do that just takes you through my process. And my process is one where it's made the RSP in its 18th year one of the 2 most purchased independent scouting guides by NFL scouts and personnel people, according to guys like Alex Brown, who is the head of recruiting for SMU, has worked with Tom Herman as a recruiter at Houston, and then was the head of recruiting at Rice. He meets with these guys every day, every week, and knows what they're buying, what they're looking at, what they read, who they look at. So you get that. Plus, I've been a fantasy writer for 20 years. So I give you real football that fantasy people know I'm going to also kind of gear towards that. So
Matt Waldman, Rookie Scouting Portfolio. You can find him on Twitter at Matt Waldman.
Here's the thing. I'll close the show with this. When you look at the running back position, it is one of the hardest to be right at. And when you try to quantify that, right? So I was looking online. I'm trying to figure out whether or not running back, because this conversation of whether it's a smart investment or not. Running back, defensive tackle, defensive end. 2 positions that I think fans and GMs all set unreasonable expectations for. Ed Oliver was supposed to be baby Aaron Donald. There are defensive ends out there who are, I don't know, Chris, how many defensive ends have you seen drafted who failed? There's a lot of them. Or at least not failed, but you drafted them in the first round and then they got outplayed by a guy in the second or third.
I was going to say AJ.
Well, I was going to say you drafted a guy in the second who might as well be...
But what was his projection that year?
Oh, my God. They were like, oh, no, he's Cam Hayward 2.0. Great. Wonderful. And then there's running back. Remember Bishop Sankey?
Heard of him?
There was a year he was the first running back off the board. Unless you're an old head, you don't even know who the fuck that guy is. So some guys over at Bleacher Report quantified it, right? They took it over a 25-year sample and said how many all-pro players were drafted in the first round out of every position category. Defensive end, defensive tackle, wide receiver, quarterback. Obviously, quarterback is the lowest at 5%, right? Because it's hard to find an all-pro quarterback. An all-pro is usually you're good. If you find one, that guy stays all-pro caliber for a long time. So you probably only have a handful of those guys in the league anyway. Running back has produced one lower than defensive tackle, lower than defensive end, all-pro running backs taken in the first round. It happens less frequently than that. And Bruce Nolan, I cribbed it from him. He had a tweet about this idea that Saquon Barkley is what happens when you have this sunk cost fallacy. He tweeted it, and I've literally been, I woke up at 3 a.m. to try to wrangle my kid back to sleep. And I was still thinking about it. Chris, if you draft a running back in the top 15 of a draft, you as a GM have already said, I believe that this player is a game-changing generational talent, correct?
Yeah.
you then almost feel sort of obligated to do what the Giants are doing, right? Like they cashed in on the 5th-year option. That's a good thing, right? First-round running backs have this caveat. I get a first-year option on this, which means I get the player can't disagree. The player doesn't have any, he doesn't have any say in this. I get him for a 5th year instead of the standard rookie 4. Yes, it's a pay increase, but it's not a long-term commitment to that pay increase. So realistically, any running back taken, I mean, when Kansas City traded up and took Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the back end of the first round a few years ago, Brett Coleman threw a fit. You know, Brett Coleman from the top of the show talking about running backs threw a fit about how it was over. Kansas City just won the NFL with this trade, blah, 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 blah. The pick didn't pan out, but the idea is, it's a good idea if you want that 5th cost-controlled year. The problem is when you go too far with that and you say this running back is worth a top 20 pick, a top 15 pick, a top whatever pick. It's running back. It's a position that's already devalued and you just boosted its value artificially. Now you as a GM go into the next cycle of that contract going, I have to continue valuing that thing if this guy does produce the value that I thought he had in the first place. You bought high and now you have to continue to buy high. And that's how the Giants find themselves in this weird scenario where they had to franchise tag Saquon Barkley. That's how they got there. So Bruce's point was don't do that because now you already feel like you use such a premium pick on him. It's sunk cost. Like you could just say, well, we already invested this, so we better keep investing. That's not the way you should treat this running back position. No team in the NFL does that, or at least not any of the successful ones. So with that in mind, where these guys go is going to be incredibly interesting, and just where Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, where they impact the draft. You know, where they fall, who decides to move up, because like I've heard that the Eagles could draft. The Eagles could draft Bijan Robinson. Great. First of all, keep him out of the AFC. But also just Howie Roseman, like I guess you could do that. But now you're staking a first-round value on a running back. You don't have any other needs? That's it? You're that one thing away from a Super Bowl? That's crazy to me, but sure, you do what you want. I just don't want it for the Bills. And also, I don't know that they would because, Chris, look what just happened to Tremaine Edmonds. You want to talk about sunk costs in the first round? Not only does our GM undervalue the running back position to where he's willing to play it cheap, he traded up to draft a linebacker. And then when that linebacker played like a player that you draft up, that you trade up into the 20s of the draft 2 pick, he turned into a star linebacker. He took a step back and said, you know what? Not me. No. You, in fact, if anything, salary cap constraints, other needs, it is sunk cost. And I'm willing to walk away from that sunk cost for the handful of years you gave me rather than continue putting good money after bad. Or not even good money after bad, but just good money after money that I don't want to spend here. I just feel like with those dynamics combined, I can't see a world where they make any kind of a strong move for an early running back, right?
Yeah.
Is there any running back like Tank Bigsby out of Auburn or anyone else? Is there a running back at all that you give a damn about, Chris?
No, because if they were to draft a running back, I'm going to assume that they're drafting a special team ace running back.
So you're talking about a running back that can be like a returner?
No, like, who's the running back that we just had that wasn't a running back? He just was on.
Tyrod Jones!
Yeah. I think if we draft a running back, we draft that running back.
That is funny. No, Deuce Vaughn. Deuce Vaughn was the one that, like, all college season, I'm like, God, watching this guy play is so much fun. I'd love this. And then I saw, like, the combine, I go, wait a minute, he's only 5'8"? That's like... He's like, what's his name? Maurice Jones-Drew, except like 30 pounds lighter.
Yeah.
Guys, short running backs do matter. Just not here and hopefully not to the Buffalo Bills. It's going to be interesting to see how the draft plays out. I'm happy that we got a chance to pick Matt Waldman's brain about it. Guys, go check out the rookie scouting portfolio. He's not kidding about the fantasy stuff. I mean, it has It keeps me in the fantasy playoffs year after year after year. Not because he tells you who to draft, but because it's, hey, here's names to watch. So if someone's dumb enough to dump him on waivers, you get that guy. If this guy's dumb enough to, or if he's out there in the late rounds, or if here's guys that you can get on dynasty leagues. You picked them up as rookies in the late rounds, and in 2 years, he'll be the guy winning your league. Have to check it out. Matt Waldman's rookie scouting portfolio. Always fun, but we got to get the hell out of here, Chris. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Krueger. That was Matt Waldman. And this has been your Rock Pile Report.